So welcome everybody to our event hosted by the Chosun History Society. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Sixiang Wang, and I am one of the co-founders of the Chosun History Society. I'm currently an assistant professor of Korean Studies at the University of California in Los Angeles. Today, Nick Marceau and I started this project as a way to create new linkages and a opportunity for scholars in Korean studies from different institutions, different contexts of work to be able to engage with one another and to and to help break down some of the traditional barriers of scholarly interaction. So we welcome everybody to our event today. So a little bit about today's event. Today's event is on publishing Korean studies research in English language journals. And here we have with us today two panelists. The first is Dr. Jack Davey, who is currently managing editor in the Journal of Korean Studies. Jack actually received his PhD at UCLA and is an archaeologist and early Koreanist specializing in the Iron Age of peripheral East Asia and the early stages of Proto-Three Kingdoms Korea. Since 2020, he's been the managing editor of the Journal of Korean Studies, which, as you know, is one of the premier English language journals in the field. So what one of the goals of the Journal of Korean Studies is to foster interesting interdisciplinary scholarship that challenges how we understand Korea as an analytical category. He currently also teaches as a member of the faculty at George Washington University and co-leads the Early Korea Cultures Center. Our second panelist is Dr. Sora Kim, who received her PhD from Seoul National University in 2021. And her research work explores the social economic history of Joseon Korea. She specializes in land taxation mechanisms and principles in the late Joseon dynasty with the use of digital humanities methodologies. And she has published several articles on Korean history in both Korean and English language international journals. Currently, she is a curator and researcher at the Kyujanggak Institute for Korean Studies at Seoul National University. With that, I will simply hand over the floor to our speakers, Jack and Sora. So let us begin, and I'll remove myself from the spotlight.
Great, thanks very much, Sixiang. Well, I think I'm going first. I'm going to give a short presentation about the Journal of Korean Studies and some sort of general tips for publishing in a journal like JKS or other English language journals. So yeah, just to start off again, thank you, Sixiang. Thank you, Sean, for inviting me. Thank you, Sora, for also presenting along with me. I do not want my perspective to be the sole authority on publishing in English language journals, so I'm very grateful to have, other people here to back me up or contradict me. So if I can just begin by sharing my screen, give me a second here. Okay. All right. So yeah, what I'm going to be doing today is just sort of giving everyone an overview of the process of publishing in an English language Korean studies journal. And most of my discussion and advice are going to be sort of tailored towards Korea-based scholars that are interested in presenting their research to an English-speaking audience, or just generally broadening their audience for their research. And I think I'll just caveat myself by just saying I'm speaking from the perspective of an editor of an interdisciplinary Korean studies journal. So I hope that most of my advice will be applicable to other kinds of journals, disciplinary specific journals like history or literature. But most of my advice will help you to get published in JKS specifically. So I'm actually going to begin by taking advantage of this opportunity to have a captive audience and do a little advertising for the Journal of Korean Studies, of which Sixiang mentioned I'm the managing editor. So JKS publishes articles in all disciplines on a broad range of topics related to Korea, both historical and contemporary. The journal began in 1969 in the University of Washington, and it's also been hosted by Columbia University quite recently, and now it is housed at George Washington University, where our editor-in-chief is Dr. Jisoo Kim, our book review editor is Dr. Emmanuel Kim, and I serve as the senior editor or managing editor on the journal. So that's basically our core editorial team there. Yeah, and just like what Sushang was saying, what we're trying to do at the journal these days is really encourage papers that engage in broader theoretical or methodological questions that really have ramifications beyond Korean studies or expand what we even consider Korea or Korean studies. We're especially welcoming papers that consider, novel transnational approaches, interdisciplinary approaches, scholarship that really demonstrates the value of Korea, not just in East Asia, but in the world. We publish 2 issues a year, a spring issue, which is made up of individual submissions, not part of any special theme, and we accept those on a rolling basis, and a fall issue, which is a special thematic issue. And so we've actually got one of those coming out later this month, and the topic is literary materiality in Korean studies. And it approaches this topic from many different angles with many different papers from interesting authors. And it is co-edited by Ksenia Chizhova and Olga Fedorenko. So please be on the lookout for that. It's coming soon, and it's going to be pretty good. Yeah, and so I'll just say we're also very particularly focused on publishing the work of early career scholars and really helping them along in their journey to become a more stable academic presence. And we're also extremely interested in publishing the work of Korea-based scholars because we're a Korean studies journal, so we know that most of the cutting edge and most interesting research is taking place in Korea. So just want to make very clear that this is definitely a group of authors we would love to feature in the journal. And so just to sort of give you a brief snapshot of the kinds of things we publish, most of our articles are in the humanities rather than the social sciences. We publish mainly history, literature, social science like anthropology and sociology, so political science, religion, other related topics. Most of our articles focus on modern Korean history or contemporary North or South Korea, but we do also have a significant number of articles focusing on earlier periods of Korean history as well. So one of the most common questions I get as the editor of JKS is, how long does it take to get published in JKS? And it really varies quite a lot. I will admit that we take a lot longer than we would like. It can be anywhere from 6 months to a year from submission to being accepted for publication and then eventually being published. Since we only publish 2 issues a year, and only one of those is taking general submissions from authors, it can take a little while to publish in JKS. And I sort of want to break down what that process is for those of you who aren't too familiar with it. So here's a sort of life cycle of a JKS article submission. So if you submit your article to JKS, we will take an initial editorial assessment of it. Me, our editor-in-chief, sometimes our members of our editorial board, if we need a subject matter expert, and then we'll decide if this article is going to be sent out for peer review. We usually send it to at least 2 peer reviewers, and we give them, we ask them to take within a month to get back to us. And then once we receive the reviews back, we do our own editorial assessment of those, and then we will get back to the author with a decision. Usually we will request more revisions. Very rarely will we accept an article as is at that point. We almost always ask for the author to go back and submit a revised manuscript based on peer review comments. And then when it comes back to us, that revised manuscript from the author, we send it out for another round of peer review, usually with the same 2 peer reviewers, sometimes also including a new 3rd reviewer. And I want to sort of emphasize here that because we're a Korean studies journal, and so we receive a lot of submissions that aren't necessarily in our disciplinary speciality. So we are very dependent on our reviewers. And so we really emphasize and take a lot of care and time and put a lot of emphasis on the comments and opinions of our reviewers. So this is why we have usually at least 2 rounds of peer review, and we try to get as many subject matter experts as we can to really look into these papers. But usually after a 2nd round of peer review of a revised manuscript, we're basically there. We'll usually accept an article at that point and go back to the author and ask for further minor revisions, and ask them to format their article according to our style guide and get it ready for us to do our own internal peer review, or our own internal copy editing, romanization editing. And that's what we'll do after we get the final draft. And then we send all our articles for a specific issue to our publisher. We partner with Duke University Press. They handle the sort of logistics of publishing for us. So everything goes to them by their publishing deadline, and then they'll do more copy editing, proofreading, formatting, and then eventually your article will be published. So that's why it takes a while. Okay. So that's sort of a very sort of broad overview of what we do at JKS and what will happen to your paper submission if you choose to publish with us. But I want to sort of now dive into, before we sort of get to our more general sort of roundtable or Q&A about journal publishing, I want to sort of give a few specific tips for getting published in an English language journal like JKS. And I'm going to sort of talk about how to structure your manuscript, make your contribution clear, what you might include in your literature review, and then a few other random tips that I've found helpful as editor. So in terms of structuring your manuscript, I want to sort of begin by giving some advice that I actually got from my professor at UC Berkeley many years ago, Laura Nelson. What is a journal article exactly? It's actually an extremely limited medium. There's really a very small number of things you can do with the format of an article, and I don't recommend trying to get too ambitious with what you're trying to say in just the one article. So basically, a journal will sort of fall into one of these 3 categories: a paper that introduces a new phenomenon, a paper that revisits an old phenomenon but with a new framework, and papers that critique existing research or frameworks with a new perspective. And so after you sort of have the sort of general purpose of your article, I would definitely recommend following the formula, looking at the specific journal you're planning to publish with, and then really tailoring the structure of your article to follow that. One of the major reasons we might sort of decline a submission or ask an author to go back and rework without a peer review first is because the papers just don't contain the kind of information or structure that we need in order to make it publishable in JKS. So in JKS, we would want an introduction with a very clear argument or thesis and what the contribution of the article is. Usually most articles in most disciplines in our journal will then have a short literature review, then moving into the bulk of your argument, and then a conclusion. Yeah, and so some of the issues I see a lot from submissions that we ultimately end up declining is, there's a lack of a very clear argument right there in the introduction, or just a sort of more descriptive or narrative treatment of the subject without any clear analysis. So definitely, as you're structuring your manuscript, have a journal in mind, target that journal, follow the formula of that journal, whatever that journal happens to be. And you can, of course, do that by reading articles that have already been published there. Making your contribution clear. Be aware of the audience of your journal. Another reason we often end up declining submissions is because it's just not a good fit. It's not something that would be of interest to our audience, which is quite a broad interdisciplinary audience of Korean studies scholars that are already quite familiar with Korea, but might not have the disciplinary expertise that you're writing to. So make sure you know who you're talking to. And on that note, articulate a contribution that goes beyond the narrow focus of your discipline. So often we'll get papers that have an incredibly compelling methodology or topic or findings or conclusions, but it's really not clear to us as editors what the contribution of this is beyond the very specific discipline that the author is writing in. So in the case of history, if you're a Koryo historian or a Chosun historian, make sure you're also making our audience aware of why they should care beyond that, if they're not actual Chosun or Koryo historians themselves. And so good things to include would be to, discuss how your work contributes or speaks across disciplines. Korean studies, of course, there's a number of really interesting, important topics that really go beyond just one discipline like history or literature or political science. So really try to explore that in your introduction. Another thing that can really help is, especially if you're covering a topic that has received a lot of attention before, is to have a very clear and compelling theoretical contribution. So how does your work speak to broader questions beyond Korea, in this case, beyond Korean history, and really say something of more broad general interest? So after you have a introduction with your clear argument and your contribution, what should you include in a literature review? I would say for an article, you don't want to get too ambitious with this. I think one of the pieces of advice I give to a lot of graduate student authors is you don't have to include absolutely everything. You don't have to prove to us that you've read absolutely every possible article or book or primary source related to the topic you're studying, but do place your work within discussions of the same or similar topics, and also engage with the research in multiple languages. So this is a piece of advice I would give to not just Korea-based scholars, but also those primarily working in the English language. Is we're a Korean studies journal. We want to see that you're engaging with the full conversation about whatever topic it is. So we don't just want to see you citing only Korean sources or only English sources. We want you to include both, and of course, if they're relevant, sources in other languages as well. But I'd say that's one of the major issues I see with a lot of submissions is not really engaging with the full range of ideas and opinions on a particular topic, and confining yourself to one language. And so in terms of just general other tips, sort of as I said before, target a specific journal and tailor your manuscript to their style of article. What kinds of articles do they publish? How do most authors that are published in that journal structure their article? And really, try to follow the formula as much as you can. Like I said, a journal article is quite a limited medium. So really you want to sort of fit your interesting research and findings and conclusions within the framework that already exists for the journal, at least if you're sort of a first-time author. Another good tip is to pay attention to formatting and romanization. And so if I see an article submission that doesn't follow our citation style, doesn't follow our romanization conventions, has a bibliography that's completely different from the kinds of articles we usually publish, I'm not going to reject it or decline it for that reason. But if I see an article that is nicely formatted, that is sort of clearly shown familiarity with the journal, with existing articles, with our style guide, that's going to sort of make me more predisposed to giving your article a closer or a second look. So I encourage you to pay attention as much as possible to formatting and romanization, even when you're submitting an initial draft. And finally, a letter of inquiry can be a good idea. It's not a bad idea if you're curious or not sure if your article or your topic is a good fit for the journal, you can just send me or any editor an email and just ask, this is my research, this is the paper I'd like to submit. Do you think it's a good idea, or do you have any advice for tailoring this to your journal? I get emails like this all the time, and I'm of course happy to offer my advice here. If you're not sure, it's a good idea to do this first, so you don't spend all your time crafting an article that an editor could have told you, take these basic steps and it'll be more appealing to our audience. So if I'm going to sort of summarize everything here, what is JKS looking for? We want articles that say something new. We want articles that contribute something across disciplines within Korean studies, but also sort of expand what we mean by Korean studies. We want articles that are situated within Korean and a non-Korean language scholarship. And we want manuscripts that, expand our idea of Korea. Issues of border crossing, transnational approaches, interdisciplinary analysis. These are sort of the stuff, this is the kind of stuff we're interested in fostering and seeing more of in Korean studies. So if you are interested in JKS, to return to my sales pitch, you can access the journal through our Duke University Press publisher site. This is where you can just read articles. There's information for authors there, an introduction to the journal, and our editorial board. Our actual submission portal is through a service called Scholar One, and the link is there. That's where you go if you want to submit an article. All submissions go through this process because as I said, we work with a publisher, and this is the pipeline for that. So we don't accept submissions via email. It's got to be through this platform. We also have an author interview series that you can check out on YouTube if you want to get an idea of the kinds of articles and authors we feature. And then finally, if you have questions where you want to write a letter of inquiry, my email is right there down below. So that's really it. I don't want to talk too long. I'd rather sort of turn this into more of a discussion rather than a lecture. So I think I'll stop there and come back to the group. Okay.
So what we'll do now is have the conversation between Dr. Davey and Dr. Kim, who will lead with, and Dr. Kim will lead us with some questions before we open.
Yeah, well, before raising several questions to Jack, I want to say thank you for everyone who are joining us today. And I want to speak in Korean to Korean audience. 제가 오늘 이 자리에 오게 된 이유는 그냥 제가 영어 논문을 몇 개 퍼블리시 했다는 이유 때문인데요. 그만큼 한국에서는 많은 연구자들이 좋은 연구를 하고 있음에도 불구하고 그 언어의 장벽이라든지 아니면 과정의 차이 때문에 영문 저널에 퍼블리시하지 못하고 있는 분들이 많은 것 같다는 생각을 했습니다. 그래서 오늘 이 자리를 통해서 여러 팁을 얻으시고 연구를 더 많은 사람들에게 소개하면서 이 코리안 스터디스 네트워크를 넓힐 수 있으면 좋겠다는 생각에 함께 하게 되었습니다. 네. And then I'm gonna ask several questions to Jack. Okay. Can you see my question? Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to ask about the role and rights of editorial boards in English journals. In Korea, journals assign peer reviewers as soon as a paper is submitted. Unlike this, I heard that English journals take a pre-review stage by editors, as you mentioned through your presentation. So then, do the editors have the kind of privilege to accept or reject a paper before peer review?
Yeah, that's a really good question. JKS certainly I'd first make the distinction between our editorial team, our editorial office, and then our editorial board. So our editorial office is, our editor-in-chief, me, our book review editor, and our editorial board is, a more of a larger group of scholars in the field who, advise and weigh in on important policy changes for the journal. So yeah, but in answer to the question, do we have sort of a pre-assessment of the article that comes in before we send it out for peer review? Yes. We will often desk reject. Well, I don't want to say often. We will sometimes desk reject a submission if we don't think that it's going to get favorable reviews, or if we can see some very obvious issues that the author needs to address beforehand. I will say that, as a Korean Studies journal, it's still quite a small academic community. So our peer review pool, our peer reviewers, are a very precious resource, right? So we don't actually want to use up that resource if we can offer constructive comments to an author before sending it out for peer review. So what we like to do is, even if we're going to decline a submission without sending it to peer review, is to give authors enough comments that they can take away and usefully restructure their paper.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question is about cover letter. It's really unfamiliar to Korean people. Well, Korean journals usually require just an abstract, a paper, and a brief bibliography for a peer review stage. But English journals request a cover letter. When I first received this request, I searched what is cover letter on Google. Well, the role of the cover letter is unfamiliar to many Korean scholars. So can you introduce the roles of those letters and what contents should be contained and highlighted in those cover letters?
Yeah, this is another really, really great and important question. This is going to vary from journal to journal. And actually at JKS, the cover letter is really not nearly as important as your title, your abstract, and then of course, the paper yourself. To be perfectly honest, I don't really spend too much time looking at the cover letters. I go straight to the article itself. And so my, I guess, general advice for journals that do require a cover letter or put emphasis on a cover letter is, one, keep it short. And two, you can follow a pretty established formula. So, introduce yourself. I would say only 1 to 2 paragraphs max, to saying, this is the topic of the paper. This is the contribution of the paper. And this is why it is of interest to your audience. So this is really your chance to sell your article to an editor, and do that in as small a space as you can, and then end the letter. What should really be speaking for your work is the work itself, is your title, your abstract, and the paper. So yeah, this is going to vary from journal to journal, but I would say keep it short and just highlight why an editor should seriously consider your paper.
Yeah, it's a kind of advertisement of my paper, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and then the third question is about commercial journals. Well, in these days, commercial journal organizations like MDPI are gradually growing up. So compared to other English journals, the entire process is very speedy, and it attracts many Korean scholars who need immediate results. So at the same time, there are voices that articles published in these MDPI journals, something like that, should not be counted as achievements, academic achievements, since they're low quality. So how do you think about these commercial journals?
This is definitely a question that could get me in trouble if I'm if I'm not careful about my answer here. I would say, of course, there's nothing on the surface wrong with a commercial open access journal. if they publish high quality articles and if authors themselves are satisfied with the process. I do think it's extremely important to be aware and be cautious of potential predatory activity by these journals. And so a couple of general pieces of advice, I would say. One, be very skeptical and careful about any journal that requires you to pay for a peer review or for the cost of publishing and distributing the article. I think that's something not necessarily that should stop you from looking at a journal, but it's certainly something that should give you pause and perhaps reconsider. And second, if you're looking at a particular journal and you're not sure of the quality or whether you want to publish with them, I would try to get as much information as you can on the editorial team. Who is the editor-in-chief, who works in the editorial office, and usually that information for a reputable journal will be available. And then look at their editorial board. Is it made up of scholars in your field that you think have a sort of represent the diversity of the field itself and are respected in your field? And I think that would be a good way to sort of, even if a journal is quite new and you're very unsure about it, if you are aware of the people behind it, then I think that's a good way to move forward. But yeah, I understand why commercial journals like this that have a very quick turnaround time are very appealing and important for authors, especially those working in places like Korea, where there's often a lot of pressure to publish as much and as quickly as possible. So they're definitely filling a need, but yeah, without naming any specific journals, I would just say be quite careful when you're approaching a commercial journal.
Okay, it's a really helpful advice for me. And the next question is about the finding a good journal compared to those commercial ones. Well, how can people find a proper foreign journal to publish their paper in? Well, there are numerous options. So not only finding a suitable journal, but also selecting a reputable journal are too tricky, especially to Korean people. So please share your tips and teach indicators like a list or index of good journals, something like the Thomson Index, something like that. In Korea, people just know about the SCI or SCI or ANHCI. So can you introduce?
Yeah, I can certainly do my best. I would say that those two indexes you just mentioned, SSCI or Arts and Humanities Citation Index, are a really good first step in sort of creating a list of journals you're interested in. I would definitely go to them for reputable journals. So I can really only speak for Korean studies or my own discipline of archaeology or early history. And so I'd say, in general, you want to publish in a journal that you read and find useful, ideally. A journal that you'd like to engage with in their ongoing conversation about whatever topic you're interested in. So I'd first ask this potential author, what is your goal in publishing in a foreign journal? Is this something that you're doing primarily to reach some kind of quota of publications? Is this something you need for promotion or maintaining your employment? I think that should push you towards journals that have a shorter turnaround time or have a very sort of transparent editorial process, so you know what you need to do in order to publish with them. But if your goal is either that, not that, or in addition to that, you want to just sort of broaden your audience to reach a new audience for your research, then yeah, I would first look for journals that are connected to scholarly organizations that you're connected to. So for instance, the Association for Asian Studies publishes a journal. And if you're a member of that, or if you've presented at that conference, I would look to journals like them. But any professional academic societies you're a member of, I would look to them and journals that they are partnered with or publish themselves. And again, I would search primarily for journals that you yourself find useful. You should try to publish in journals that you want to be part of this ongoing conversation with. Beyond that, I don't have any specific lists of good journals or bad journals. That's my answer.
Okay, so you're saying that to find a good journal, I have to read lots of articles from good journals, right? To find
sorry to make everyone do more work, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. And here is my last final question. So from the editor's point of view, what do you think are the characteristics or limitations of articles submitted by Korean scholars? Which points or aspects should be supplemented and strengthened to be published in international journals?
This is an interesting question that I would like to sort of reframe and ask in a slightly different way. I would say, what should an author, Korean or otherwise, be doing to get published in an English language journal like JKS? And I would just go back to sort of some of the points I outlined earlier. Structure your paper according to the conventions of that journal, especially if you're coming from a non-English academic context. Try as much as you can to structure and frame your work in a way that other authors in that journal does it. Engage broadly with Korean and non-Korean sources, and really think about an English language audience that is quite broad. Think about how your work is relevant to and contributes to larger conversations than simply within your small discipline. How does it speak to a wider audience, especially those that aren't historians, for instance? How does your work speak to that? I would say those are sort of my general tips. We get so many submissions from Korea-based scholars that I really can't generalize and say there's any one thing they're doing right or wrong. So I think I'd like to focus on what I think everyone can do to improve their article and get published. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for encouraging me and other audience. Okay, so that's it.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We're going to have about 40 minutes for question and answer from the audience. So I hope you stay for the remainder of our event. Actually, using my sort of host privilege, I might just add something to the last point, right, about speaking to a broader audience. And I'm speaking more as somebody who has been a peer reviewer, reviewing articles that might be published by younger scholars, publishing who are used to publishing in different contexts. And I think one thing that does happen, at least based on what I've reviewed, is, let's say you are a specialist on a certain topic and you're used to writing for an Asian studies audience in Korea. And you expect that your Korean language audience is very well versed and knowledgeable about the subject matter. And now you're publishing to an English language journal, and you're being told that you need to appeal to a broader audience, appeal to the English speaking audience. And then I think sometimes, and this is what I think might be a mistake based on the articles I've reviewed, is when the author thinks, oh, I need to make it broad, that means I need to make it general. So then the scholar, what they do is, instead of writing about the topic of their research, they try to give a summary of their research across time, right? So for example, let's say this is a specialist of, making this up, let's say agricultural history in the Koryo period. I'm making this up, right? And the research, the new research might be something very specific. But then in trying to make the article broader, appeal to a broader audience, they give a general history of Koryo, right? Thinking, okay, the English language audience doesn't know Koryo, which may be true. But I think that is probably not the right way to do it, right? Appealing to a broader audience is not about giving general summaries, because you're still speaking to academic specialists, and they want to see your specific contribution, new contribution to the field. So broad doesn't mean general, right? And I think it still needs to be specific and targeted, and try to and limited in scope, just like it would be a journal in any other context. But it's just that the significance of the findings need to be articulated for that wider audience. So does that make sense, Jack? Or
yeah, I agree completely. Yeah, and thank you for sort of clarifying that, because yeah, we don't want very general information that, as you say, summarizes a period or topic. We still want a very specific and focused piece of research, but rather than trying to explain everything, just make sure that the larger contribution of your work is clear. So don't broaden your discussion, but try to make non-specialists feel like your work is important, right? What is significant about your work, but not but we're Korean studies, so no one needs a history of the Koryo period, as you say. No one needs to be told what kimchi is or anything like that. We know, but we do want to know why your very specific and important research topic should be relevant to other readers outside your specific discipline. Yeah.
Okay. So if we have questions, just feel free to raise your hand, and then I'll spotlight you, and then you can ask your question. Otherwise, another option is you can type in your questions in the chat, and then we can proceed that way as well. 질문이 없어요? Oh, okay. We have a question from Chung Ye-mok. Thank you for your kind explanation for your journal. I'm curious about whether or not the submission of a paper to your journal costs money.
No, it is completely free. In fact, I think that would be, as the questions that Sora brought up earlier, I think a journal that upfront asks you to pay for consideration is a journal you should be very skeptical about and cautious in approaching. JKS, we don't ask you to pay for peer review. We don't ask you to pay for production costs. No, yeah.
Second question from Chung-il Han. Question to Dr. Kim. I am a Korean PhD student based outside of Korea. This may sound like an odd question, but from your point of view, what would be the merits of submitting an article to a Korean language journal? It seems that many Korea-based scholars are aiming to get their articles published in English language journals, but I wonder if there were any cases from the other way around.
Well, actually, in my case, the first purpose of the publishing in English journal was just lots of rejection from Korean journal. Because I made the ambitious some kind of theories at the time. So lots of Korean scholars, especially the older people, rejected my opinion. So they rejected to publish my paper in their Korean journal. So I chose the other options. It was the English journal. And at the same time, lots of Korean universities required the high-ranked journal to give some tenures or hire them as a professor. So lots of Korean people are publish their journal to the English journal. But in the opposite side, I don't think that there are rare Koreanists in the out of Korea who want to publish their paper in Korean journal. Well, except Sushang Wang, Professor Wang. I had translated his paper in Korean. And he published his paper in Korean journal, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That was 2016. So I can speak to maybe one of the reasons why somebody based outside, let's say in the US, would want to publish in Korean. I mean, I think it's just that the English language community for Korean studies is just smaller than the Korean community, right? And I think, from in the American university, in most institutions, publishing in Korean is not helpful for tenure or for promotion. At UCLA, actually, it is, they do count it. It's actually useful, but most departments probably not. So there isn't this incentive, this sort of career incentive, or rather a promotion-based incentive or salary incentive to do so. However, if you want your name to be known in Korea, to be known by your field there, it's a way to introduce your own research to that community. And there are certain kinds of questions, right, that might be very interesting to a specific targeted community in the Korean language field that might be more specialized, that would not be as interesting to what is served by English language journals, right? As Jack mentioned, Journal of Korean Studies has an interdisciplinary focus. But what if the question you want to address something very much more specific, and really would be very interesting only to, let's say, a specific time period within a specific text, and really the conversation is in that circle, then you're more likely to be able to find a venue for that kind of research. So I think, so these are the different kinds of reasons I see that you would want to do that. And I think this is the larger question. The general issue is always about audience, right? You're writing something for somebody.
And I think that the writing their papers in Korean is really a kind of necessary thing to at least Koreanists. Well, in the aspect of promoting their research to lots of scholars who are studying Korea, is living in Korea and reading articles written in Korea. So I think they have to do some kind of doing efforts to translate their paper in Korean. So I think it's a kind of a process of making network between the Korea and other foreign countries. And sometimes I can find that there are lots of basic mistakes about the Korean studies in the English papers. I mean that who doesn't know Yangban at all, even though the author are saying that I'm the specialist in the Joseon history, Joseon dynasty history. But the really detailed one was totally wrong. So that kind of mistakes can be discovered before the publishing paper, which who want to share their opinions before publish their articles with other Korean scholars, I think.
Right. Yeah, there's a deeper pool of specialized expertise in Korean language, so you'll just get that level of feedback that you might not get from from a more interdisciplinary context. Jack, did you want to respond to this?
Yeah, I don't have much to add here. I've not published in Korean myself, but I presented in Korean academic conferences in Korean, and yeah, I think the value of that, at least for me in my work, is getting that harsh feedback. Because when I'm talking to archaeologists or historians in the U.S., they don't know how wrong I am, but certainly everyone at Kyungbuk University knows exactly how wrong I am, and I want them to tell me.
So we have a question. We have a question from Cheong Ha. Thank you for organizing this workshop. I'm wondering if I can publish an accepted paper by, let's say, JKS later as a chapter of a monograph with a different publisher later on. And this is actually a common issue.
Yeah, I have to say, generally we would be supportive of that. First of all, if your article, in order to be published in JKS initially, this has to be a new original article with new original research. We don't accept translations or previously published material. But after you have published in JKS, if you want to include that article or part of it as part of a larger book or a book chapter or put it somewhere else, we're generally supportive of that. And what we generally do is point you towards the permissions department of our publisher, Duke University Press, and they will help you determine what you can publish and which other venues you can publish it in. So we at the JKS editorial office don't really have a problem with that sort of thing, but there are a few sort of rights issues you will have to work with our publisher to sort out, but generally it's possible. Yeah.
Other questions? Okay, let me ask a question. So for there's an audience question actually. We'll let Sean ask his question. And Sean, by the way, is assistant director of the Chosun History Society. Is it director? No, I forget our title. But anyway, so Sean was a big help in organizing this event. I'm going to spotlight you if that's okay, and then you can ask your question directly.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much, first Sushang, for hosting this event. I know that it's like 5 a.m., 6 a.m. in the morning in UCLA, LA area. So this is huge, and sorry that I could continue joining after this question that I would like to ask. I have a class to teach. So thanks again, Jack and Davey for Jack and Sora for having this wonderful occasion. And this is a huge contribution to our field, especially for those who are in this process of writing their research and trying to publish it. And I also got a lot of insights from this session. Thanks again. So the question that I have is about some kind of abnormal situation. So it's a question to Jack. So the question that I'm asking is that the process of reviewing submission of journals that are not individual research papers, but kind of a special issue. So let's say, hypothetically, there is a kind of group of scholars who want to publish their work as a collaboration to Journal of Korean Studies. And do you find any kind of different process of approaching to those kind of submission, those kind of collective submission? And in that case, what are the kind of advice or suggestion that you can provide to those scholars? I don't know if that makes sense as a question, but thanks again.
Yeah, it definitely does. Actually, thank you for bringing this up. This is not something I covered in my initial presentation, but it is something that we do. It's very important at JKS. We do publish one thematic or special issue every year. And the procedure for that is we accept proposals from potential special issue editors. So they will come to us with a description of a topic and a description, and then a list of authors that they expect to contribute to this. And so we will generally approve this special issue and special issue topic, and then those special issue editors will work with their own authors to finish their papers, and then when they're all submitted at the same time to us, And then we begin our usual peer review process. So I guess in terms of how it's different from a general submission is, yeah, first the issue and topic has to be approved, and then the authors and special issue editors work together and then submit it to us, and then we review each submission individually. But yeah, and I will say that if anyone is interested in doing this, we're definitely accepting proposals or pitches for special issues at any time. We currently have, I believe, our special issue topics locked in until 2025. So the earliest we would be able to consider your special issue 4 would be 2026. So again, going back to that, how long does it take to get published in JKS? It takes a while. Sorry.
No. Thank you so much for being transparent about those timelines. So yeah, if there's person who are in a kind of different time schedule for expected publication, then that definitely that really helps in terms of making decisions. So thanks again for telling us about the timeline.
Okay.
My pleasure.
All right, I'm gonna de-spotlight you for now. And we have another question from Chung-il Han. Are you allowed to submit the same paper to different journals at the same time? Or should you do it one by one and wait until you hear a decision?
I guess you can do whatever you want, really. But generally we would ask you to not submit it to multiple journals at the same time as ours if you want to be considered for JKS. I do understand, why you might want to do that, because it can take some time for us to reach a decision, and you don't want to just be waiting without doing anything. Yeah, we would prefer it if you did not submit to multiple journals, and we will try to come back with an initial decision for you as quickly as we can, so that you're not just waiting, and give you the opportunity to take it to another journal if you want. Yeah.
One thing I should add to this is, especially if we're publishing in a more specialized journal in English, and really when I say specialized, it could be any Korean studies journal, right? So if you are working in a field where there are not many colleagues who write in the English language, if you, let's say, submit to Journal of Korean Studies, Seongyun Journal of Asian Studies, Seoul Journal of Korean Studies, Korean History, International Journal of Korean History. If you submit to all 5 at once with one article on, I don't know, early Chosun history, it is very likely that many of these journals will ask the same person to peer review that journal. And once that is discovered, that this one person is getting peer review requests for the same article from 4 different journals, it will probably upset some people. So it's sort of one of these things that's against the norm to do, right? And yes, in sort of larger fields, right? If you're in material science and there's 10,000 people who might be eligible peer reviews, it's maybe possible to get around this, but it's easy to get caught doing this in the humanities. So on that note, maybe I'll ask a very basic question, and I think it's a question that many people wonder, is what is the ratio of acceptance, rejection? I mean, of course, there is it may or may not be that meaningful of a number, but I think it's something that would be a subject of curiosity.
Yeah, our acceptance rate generally for each year hovers around 30% acceptance rate. And I would say that, let's see, most of those papers that we decline, this happens in the initial assessment of the articles. So it's just papers that come in that aren't, they're just not appropriate for a Korean studies journal, or they're just not a good fit, or they're clearly written for another disciplinary audience. So we usually sort of decline most of those submissions. Then if we make it to peer review, there's a much better chance that your article can eventually be published in JKS. But yeah, our overall acceptance rate is just under 30%.
Right. And so the more
that makes us sound so much more selective than I feel we actually are. I want to encourage as many people to submit as possible, and not be scared of a number like that.
Yeah, I think 30% is pretty good in terms of acceptance rate for. I don't know what it's like for JS or anything. I imagine it's a lower number, simply because they publish a little bit more frequently, but I mean it's a much wider disciplinary cover, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
More questions? Goen Lee asks, this is a similar question to Chung Han's, but opposite direction. I'm a Koreanist based in Korea, and I wonder if I can submit a paper originally written in Korean to an English language journal to reach a broader audience. In this case, the paper would be rewritten in English and not just translated for a new audience engaging more English works. Does this count as plagiarism?
Ooh, that's a very good question. So I guess just to sort of state JKS's policy up front is that we do not accept translations of works. We only accept new original papers with new original research. But I will say in this case, it sounds like they're asking, could I submit a paper on the same topic that I've published in before in another language, but reframed with lots of new and interesting information? I think, yeah, we would consider that, and sort of consider on a case-by-case basis whether this constitutes, translating a prior work versus a new work in and of itself. Yeah, so generally, we do not accept translated articles that have previously been published elsewhere. But yeah, certainly if you have a disciplinary specialty and a topic you focus on, you could certainly publish on the same topic as you published on before, as long as it was substantially new.
Yeah, I think on this note, maybe Jack, your earlier slide, right, about that Sarah Nelson offered, was it? No,
Laura Nelson.
Nora Nelson, right? Sorry, different Nelson, but Sarah Nelson was the archaeologist, so that's why. Anyway, maybe we can go back to that slide that you have about yeah,
sure,
because I think it is very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's see.
Yeah.
Right. So introduce a new phenomenon, revisit an old phenomenon with a new framework. So I guess the question would be if the rewriting constitutes a new framework, right? If it's adapted to a new audience, engaging with new theoretical debates or different theoretical debates, right? So it could be the same research base, right? The same empirical findings, but then speaking to a different disciplinary framework, engaging with a different conversation, that would count as revisiting an old phenomenon with a new framework.
Definitely, yeah. And yeah, so I would hope that, yes, someone who is well-versed in a topic that is published on it before would come to us with a new perspective on that same topic. That would be great.
Yeah. I think the other issue with translation is probably if it's directly translated, right? If it's already been published in Korean and then it's directly translated into English, it will become very obvious that the audience is different, right? And then it would automatically, even if it were original, it would not be exactly appropriate for the journal because it's engaging with a different set of conversations. Maybe.
Yeah,
Not
it's
always.
unlikely that, yeah, an article written in, for instance, Korean that is directly translated and submitted as a new article, even if we didn't know it was a translation or the author didn't tell us, it's unlikely that we would accept that article, especially as is, because it just would be structured completely differently to how JKS. Usually, articles usually published in JKS are structured. Oops.
Yeah, but the question of is this plagiarism? Would it be plagiarism? Would any of these cases be? Yeah.
It would certainly be. We would consider it, a form of academic dishonesty to be presented with a translation that we were not made aware of it being a translation, and we wouldn't publish it for that reason. But yeah, I don't know if we would consider it plagiarism per se. I don't think we'd go back to the author's institution and then tell them that their scholar is plagiarizing or anything.
Yeah. Well, unless the article is not yours.
True. Yes.
Right.
That would definitely be plagiarism.
Right. Okay.
If you're translating someone else's work and passing it off as your own, yeah, that's plagiarism.
Okay, so from a question from CK Ha. I want to ask for your views on English language journals published by Korean institutions. Do they appeal to as much to an international audience?
I would say certainly the ones that publish articles in my fields are very much respected and worth publishing in, and will reach a wider audience. I think I go to Akta Koreana quite a lot, which I believe is published through, is it Yongnam University? Somewhere in Daegu. Keimyang. And the Seoul Journal of Korean Studies, of course, published by the Kyujanggak. Also a very good journal that has a very wide readership in English language Korean studies, for sure.
I mean, I think one thing to keep in mind is that there aren't that many Korean studies specific journals that are published outside of the US. I mean, outside of Korea, right? I mean, maybe one other question is sort of maybe not exactly the topic of today's panel, but maybe Jack, you can pick your thoughts on this. Let's say there's a Korean archaeologist, but they want to publish not in the Journal of Korean Studies, but let's say a journal of archaeology that isn't Asia focused or Korea focused. What advice might you give that colleague?
Man, I would like that advice too, please. This is something I think all of us as Korea specialists can relate to, is how do we make Korea relevant, interesting, important to a general disciplinary audience of archaeologists or historians or of literature specialists. Yeah, this is, you would have to structure and present your work completely differently than if you were going for an Asian studies audience. I would say your theoretical contribution must be much more significant and of interest. I think in a journal like JKS, of course, it's important to have a theoretical contribution, but we would also be very amenable to accepting something that changes our understanding of a very Korea-specific topic. But I think for, at least in terms of archaeology, yeah, what is the larger theoretical or methodological contribution you're making that this case study of Korea makes interesting or important? But yeah, this is a question I constantly ask myself as I look at my own rejection letters from archaeology journals. Yeah, it's not something I have a definitive answer on at all.
Sora, you've had experience publishing in sort of more general, well, I shouldn't say general, but non-Korea specific disciplinary journals in English.
Well, actually, I tried, but I heard lots of advices from Korean colleagues that do not please. That is just because that those journals are not counted as SCI journals. So I cannot be calculated as the high rank. So actually, I submitted my paper and I got several the conversations with editorial boards on those kind of journals, but I stopped because I have to save my bullets. So yeah, that's really sad to me because I want to publish my paper to those kind of journal to find more leaders who are interested in my research. But unfortunately, in Korea, I have to find the more good, better job. So to be survived in job market, the choosing the journal, the type of journal is not my own will. Yeah.
So I have some experience with publishing in sort of journals targeting non-Korea specific audiences. Just recently, there was one published in the Journal of the History of Knowledge. And the way this was done was I did not submit my article directly to them, but rather it was a special issue that was part of, I was with a group of other specialists who are from different parts of the world doing things like working on the history of bureaucracy. And then so I was there to talk about something related to Korea in conversation with specialists from working at different historical periods. So I think one thing we can do as a Korean studies field is think about reaching out or going to conferences and events where we meet people who work on related topics, but in different area specialties, and just being a part of that conversation. And through that networking and conversation, I think these opportunities will come up, right? Special issues where a voice representing Korea can be included. And I think this is something that could be one strategy of being right to you. In order to be represented in the conversation, you have to be part of that conversation. And I think some of that is has to happen even before the writing or the research stage. Yeah. Of course, with COVID, nobody has been doing international conferences, but maybe that will get better. More questions?
Can I just say, generally, if you think of a question, after this session, please just contact me in either English or Korean or whatever language you want. I'm always happy to answer questions about the journal and encourage international scholars to publish with JKS. So if you've got a half-formed question now that you don't want to submit to the chat, please just contact me anytime.
I have some questions. I'm just sort of imagining on behalf of our audience. So first question, I think they're related questions, right? Related to formatting. The first question is, how, you're writing in English, how good does the English have to be? Does it have to be grammatically perfect and idiomatic, American, British? Or, how much does that matter at the initial submission stage for a journal like JKS?
That's a pretty good question. Certainly at this publishing stage, we would expect it to be grammatically as perfect as it can be written in natural sounding English, however you want to define that. So JKS is somewhat limited by its resources. We just don't have the resources or ability to engage in very intense copy editing that will turn a article which is slightly rough into something that is that we can publish. So this is certainly something that an author will have to do at some stage before it's published in JKS. And so, no, it does not have to be perfect or completely beautiful English. I mean, certainly none of my stuff is ever perfect or beautiful when I submit it. But yeah, I think general basic copy editing and readability is important. Otherwise, we can't even assess it initially, and we can't send it out to peer reviewers. So certainly, it needs to be at a certain level of readability and polish. And I'm reluctant to sort of create a threshold or standard, but yeah, this is something I really wish we could do more of, is work more closely with authors to help them in that stage of it, because I think that is, that's one of the major barriers to getting more international authors is this logistical language thing. But yeah, I would say, unfortunately, in JKS's case, it's somewhat the responsibility of the author to make it readable enough that we can send it out for peer review.
So the related issue is also, you mentioned that articles should follow the style sheet and the romanization of JKS, and that it's not maybe the end all be all of accepting or rejection, but it can help your case. But as we know, that there are all these different romanization standards. The style sheets are very different, and it can be very challenging for scholar working from the outside to understand and to be able to adapt to this. So I wonder.
Yeah, and it's not like I said, that's why I put it in these sort of other tips. It's not something that's essential or something that will get you rejected. It's something that's nice to see, and it signals to me that, oh, you've really paid attention to our journal. But yeah, I think actually, honestly, I would give a bit more leeway to an article from an international scholar that didn't perfectly follow our formatting guidelines initially. And we can certainly work with them as we go through the peer review and revision process to improve that. Yeah, I don't know if I want to get into romanization right now, but this is a topic that has come up at our editorial board meetings and things like that, about which or how many standards we should accept and publish. And for now, the decision has been to maintain everything should be in the McCune-Reischauer format, and that's it. Yeah.
I mean, there is for those of you who aren't familiar with McCune-Reischauer system, there are some resources for it.
Yeah, there's a converter that Busan University hosts, which is really helpful.
Right.
But not always completely correct.
Right.
But it's a good guide.
The definitive authority on McCune-Reischauer is actually this is one resource in the University of Chicago, and then it's the Library of Congress. I think for the United States, one reason McCune-Reischauer is maintained as a standard is just practically the library system uses McCune-Reischauer for romanizing Korean. So I'm gonna just include these two links in the chat, and the second one is the Library of Congress worksheet for a guide for McCune-Reischauer. And the first one is a sort of easier shorthand guide for it. So maybe that can be helpful. And another tool that I think, I don't know how easy it is to access, but the Chicago Manual of Style, it's very, I think it's expensive to buy. I don't know if it's accessible in Korea, but it's usually what most journals in the humanities and social sciences use as the basis for their formatting guidelines. But
yeah, would it be all right if I shared my screen briefly?
Sure,
For
absolutely.
a second. Yeah, let's see. So yeah, so this is our journal page for our Duke University Press journal page, and this is where you can see previous issues and articles. But I want to direct everyone's attention to this tab here for authors. If you go to our submission guidelines page, you'll have our general guidelines, and then a link to our style guide, which we just updated, and it's got a whole long section about romanization. And so this is where you can go to get that information directly pertaining to JKS. And I'll share that link in the chat too.
Yeah, and generally speaking, most journals have a specific style guide that authors are expected to follow, and they're usually a little bit different from one another, but other questions? Well, thoughts, questions, remarks, complaints?
Any disgruntled authors want to sort of come at me about rejected articles or anything?
Okay. Well, I don't want to force everyone to stay if there are no final questions. And I think, we've been here for about an hour and a half. So maybe it's time to give our panelists a well-deserved break. And thank you, Dr. Davey and Dr. Kim, for joining us. Yeah, thank you so much. Just do our little clap and.
Well, yeah, thank you very much for putting this on. And yeah, again, like I said, please contact me if you have any interest in JKS or any questions.
I'm gonna contact you.
Yeah. This is awkward, but I just realized while we were thanking you, we had one last question from CK Ha. Maybe we should just take it and then go, if that's okay. One last question, if possible. I'm not sure if this was mentioned during the talk, but how long does it usually take for a manuscript to be published at JKS after submission? Also, once it passes the initial and second peer review process, would it be safe to assume that we shouldn't worry too much about rejection?
Okay, I'll give you the breakdown of time. We really try to get back to an author with an initial decision within 6 weeks of submission. That's if it goes to initial peer review. If we're sort of desk rejecting, we'll try to get back to you much quicker than that. The whole process from submission to acceptance to publication can take anywhere from 6 months to a year. Once it passes the initial or second peer review process, would it be safe to assume we shouldn't worry too much about revision? Ooh. I don't know how to answer this. Yeah, if we've sort of gone through one round of peer review and revision and sent it back to the reviewers, we're very interested in your paper and we are invested in working with you to make it publishable. So yeah, I would say if you've made it that far, you're in pretty good shape. And I would keep going, keep revising, and you'll get there eventually. And I'd say one specific thing to JKS is, since we only publish one general issue a year, that means that you can have your article accepted for publication, but it can still be several months before it will actually appear in print. So for example, we finalized our article list for the spring 2023 issue all the way back in August. So those authors their articles have been accepted, but they won't actually be published until next March.
All right, now we have the real finale. Thank you so much, and hope to see some of you around in the near future. And thank you again for coming. Take care, everyone. Good night. stop for that.